Today we will review the incentive calculation form, which effective March 1st, 2021, is one of the General Land Office's required documents for voluntary buyout or acquisition programs. A hyperlink to the incentive calculation form can be found on the Texas General Land Office website at recovery.texas.gov. To locate the document, go to the local buyout and acquisition program page, which is linked below in the description section of this video. Scroll down to the right side checklist section and click on the link for the incentive calculation form. Once you click on the link, your computer will download the fillable document. Please note you will need Microsoft Excel to view and edit this document. In the local buyout and acquisition program, subrecipients have the opportunity to offer housing incentives to applicants of the program in addition to the assistance they will receive from the sale of their home. Housing incentives, as a standalone activity, are not eligible under the local buyout and acquisition program. The value of property in lower risk areas is often higher than the values of damaged properties in high risk areas, and the GLO understands the additional costs associated with relocating may be cost prohibitive for property owners to absorb when relocating. Furthermore, local governments may wish to structure a housing incentive program in a way that encourages residents to remain in their community to help foster continuity and avoid moving people away from their homes, families, jobs, and other critical community support systems. Therefore, subrecipients may design housing incentive programs that seek to yield particular outcomes, provided there is justification and support for the policy and program decisions within the subrecipient program guidelines. The incentive payments are offered in addition to the buyout or acquisition payment to encourage households to participate in the program and remove homes from harm's way. If subrecipients elect to offer housing incentives, they must include the incentives that will be offered in their program guidelines and any requirements for those incentives. Incentives cannot be used on second homes. The local buyout and acquisition program has three types of incentives: relocation assistance, down payment assistance, and buyout incentives. Relocation assistance. When used in conjunction with a buyout or acquisition activity, LBAP funds can be used for temporary or permanent relocation costs. Subrecipients in their program guidelines should elect reasonable caps for relocation assistance based on the needs of their program at an amount not to exceed the caps set by the Texas GLO in the program's housing guidelines. The GLO's relocation caps include $10,000 for an existing home, or $35,000 for a lot or newly constructed home, and $5,000 in temporary housing and temporary relocation costs. The amount of assistance will depend on the reasonable and justified need of the applicant for relocation costs. Eligible relocation costs include transportation of the displaced person and personal property. Transportation costs for a distance beyond 50 miles are not eligible unless the GLO determines that relocation beyond 50 miles is justified. Packing, crating, unpacking, and uncrating of the personal property. Disconnecting, dismantling, removing, reassembling, and reinstalling relocated household appliances and other personal property. For businesses, farms, or nonprofit organizations, this includes machinery, equipment, substitute personal property, and connections to utilities available within the building. It also includes modifications to the personal property, including those mandated by federal, state, or local law, code, or ordinance, necessary to adapt the replacement structure, the replacement site, or the utilities at the replacement site, and modifications necessary to adapt the utilities at the replacement site to the personal property. Storage of the personal property for a period not to exceed 12 months unless the GLO determines that a longer period is necessary. Insurance for the replacement value of the property in connection with the move and necessary storage. The replacement value of property lost, stolen, or damaged in the process of moving, not through the fault or negligence of the displaced person, his or her agent or employee, where insurance covering such loss, theft, or damage is not reasonably available. Other moving-related expenses that are not listed as ineligible under Section 24.301H, as the GLO determines to be reasonable and necessary. The reasonable cost of disassembling, moving, and reassembling any appurtenances attached to a mobile home, such as porches, decks, skirting, and awnings which were not acquired, anchoring of the unit, and utility hookup charges. The reasonable cost of repairs and/or modifications so that a mobile home can be moved and/or made decent, safe, and sanitary. And finally, the cost of a non-refundable mobile park entrance fee to the extent it does not exceed the fee at a comparable mobile home park if the person is displaced from a mobile home park, or the GLO determines that payment of the fee is necessary to effect relocation. Down payment assistance incentives. Subrecipients may offer up to 100% of the required minimum down payment at a maximum amount based on the needs of their program, but not to exceed the cap set by the Texas GLO in the program's housing guidelines. The Texas GLO caps down payment assistance at $35,000. The following items must be met to be eligible for the down payment assistance incentives. Applicants must have purchased a lot or are using a pre-owned lot located outside of a floodplain or to a lower risk area for construction of a new home. A construction date must be provided. Or the applicant purchased a newly constructed or existing home located outside of a floodplain or a lower risk area. The applicant will be required to complete a 58.6 checklist on the new home or lot. Purchase homes must be considered decent, safe, and sanitary, and will be required to pass the HQS inspection. Any costs associated with bringing the residence up to the required standards is the responsibility of the homeowner. The funding must be used within a time frame established by the subrecipient in their program guidelines. The applicant household income must be at or below 120% the area median income. Buyout incentives. Subrecipients are able to offer additional assistance as buyout incentives. The purpose of the incentive is to encourage maximum participation by property owners and remove as many properties as possible from high-risk areas. Incentive payments should assist the household with the necessary funds to buy an existing home or construct a home on a newly purchased lot as applicable. Subrecipients in their program guidelines should elect reasonable caps for buyout incentives based on the needs of their program at an amount not to exceed the caps set by the Texas GLO in the program's housing guidelines. Buyout incentives are capped at $35,000 by the program. The following must be met for the applicant to be eligible for the buyout incentives. The applicant must have purchased a lot or are using a pre-owned lot located outside of a floodplain or to a lower risk area within the subrecipient's jurisdiction for construction of a new home. A construction date must be provided, or the applicant purchased a newly constructed or existing home located outside the floodplain or a lower risk area of the subrecipient's jurisdiction. The applicant will be required to complete a 58.6 checklist on the new home or lot. The funding must be used within a time frame established by the subrecipient in their program guidelines. The applicant must provide documentation demonstrating the need for additional buyout incentive. The incentive calculation form is meant to assist subrecipients in calculating eligible incentive payments to applicants. There are 4 tabs on the form, 1 sheet for instructions, and 1 sheet for each incentive that may be offered. Subrecipients should ensure they are completing the correct sheet based on the incentive being offered to the applicant. For this video, we will use an example of a fictional applicant and location to give a sample of how to complete the form. The first sheet on the incentives calculation form are the instructions for the form. The instructions state that the incentive calculation form is for families and individuals applying for incentives under the CDBG-DR buyout or acquisition program. This form is not to be used for people to request URA assistance. Subrecipients should provide the appropriate HUD form for persons to complete to request URA assistance. The URA assistance claim forms and instructional videos are located on the buyout and acquisition page on the Texas General Land Office website. The completion of this form is in a phased approach. First, homeowners requesting incentives, in addition to the fair market value sale of their home, should complete this form. Subrecipients should work with applicants to understand what incentives they may be eligible for, collect backup documentation, and provide assistance. When completing the form, applicants and subrecipients should refer to the subrecipient's program guidelines to determine the incentives that may be offered and any additional eligibility requirements and the threshold limit placed on the incentive. Then, after the applicant signs and submits the form, the subrecipient should review the form for eligibility, collect any additional information or documentation needed, and complete the subrecipient use sections on the form, making their final determination of the amounts to award. Each sheet on the form corresponds to a different incentive that is eligible under the local buyout and acquisition program. Applicants and subrecipients should ensure the sheet completed in the form corresponds to the incentive being requested. All backup documentation should also be attached in the file. If an applicant applies for incentive assistance and all or part of the assistance is denied, the subrecipient should provide the applicant with a written explanation for the reason and give the applicant the opportunity to appeal the decision using the program's appeal form. See the instructional video and sample homeowner appeal form on the buyout and acquisition page of the Texas GLO website. The second sheet of the checklist is for homeowners to request temporary or permanent relocation assistance incentives. Applicants may be eligible to apply for 1. A fixed payment based off the fixed payment cost schedule, 2. Payment for estimated reasonable moving costs and related expenses based on quotes received, or 3, in some cases, a payment based on a combination of both options. The eligible amount cannot exceed the cap amount in the subrecipient's program housing guidelines. To begin, subrecipients should assist with the completion of the top part of the form. In the first row, subrecipients should input the time frame that applicants must submit their requests for the incentive payments. This can be a hard deadline, such as by December 1st, 2021. Or it could be a time frame, such as within 3 months of the acceptance of the offer letter. The time frame should be reasonable for the applicant to submit the documentation while meeting the program's timelines. The timeline should be equitable across all applicants. Then, in the table below, the subrecipient should input the subrecipient name, the GLO contract number according to the GLO contract, the subrecipient case manager working with the applicant, the contact information of the case manager, the applicant name, the applicant ID, which is the Tiger Project ID. This number will be generated in Tiger when the applicant's project is created and the left side checklist and application are uploaded. The co-applicant name, if applicable, and the address of the buyout or acquisition property. In the next row, the applicant should check off all incentives that they will be applying for. They should complete a sheet in this calculation form for each incentive checked off. The form is then divided into sections based on the type of relocation incentive being requested. This form should be completed in phases. On the first page, the applicant should input the requested amounts and attach all backup documentation. In the second phase, the subrecipient will review the request and backup documentation for eligibility, provide technical assistance to the applicant to help them update the form or documentation if needed, and ultimately provide their final assessment of the eligible amounts in the subrecipient use sections. Relocation Assistance Sheet, Section A. Section A is a table for the applicant to input information about the relocation to determine eligibility. In the first row, the applicant should check off whether yes, all applicants will or have moved to the same dwelling, or no, household members will move to separate dwellings. If household members will move to different dwellings, applicants should list the names of all household members and the addresses they will move to in Excel row 34. If all of the household members and addresses do not fit into the cell provided, applicants should attach a document titled Remarks, where they will include additional information that didn't fit in the cell. In the table, the applicant should place the information for the applicant's units. They should first input the address of the unit moving from, the number of rooms that the original unit has, the date they occupied that unit, and the date they will vacate. Note, the number of rooms should exclude bathrooms, hallways, and closets. You will notice in our example that Mr. Rodriguez and his family were forced to evacuate their buyout property at 123 Dulce Lane during the storm, and the property has since been inhabitable. They have been living with Mr. Rodriguez's sisters at 256 Rose Street. Therefore, the address they input is where they are currently living and moving from. In the next row, the applicant should only complete the information if they will be moving temporarily to another unit until they can move into their permanent residence. If homeowners need to move into a temporary unit and request temporary relocation assistance, justification should be placed in the file as to why temporary location is required. Applicants should input the address of the temporary unit, the number of rooms of the unit, the date occupied, and the date they will vacate the temporary unit. Applicants that will not move temporarily can input NA into this row. In the next row, applicants will input information on the permanent unit that they will move into. They should input the address, number of rooms, and date occupied, or projected occupation date. In the fourth row in the table, applicants should check whether the permanent replacement unit is an existing home that they will buy, an empty lot that they will buy to construct on, or a new construction home. The next row is for information for household members moving to different households, or any other comments that would affect eligibility. If additional space is needed, applicants should attach a separate sheet titled Remarks. The last question in Section A. The applicant should check whether they will be using temporary housing prior to moving to their permanent residence. If the answer is yes, the applicant will need to complete Section B. If the answer is no, the applicant can skip Section B and proceed to Section C. Relocation Assistance Sheet, Section B. Section B is for the calculation of temporary relocation incentives and is only applicable for applicants that must move temporarily prior to moving into their permanent residence. Applicants should attach documentation as to why temporary relocation is required. On the top part of the section, applicants should input the period for which the costs will be or have been incurred. This should match or be less than the period of temporary relocation input in Section A. Then, applicants should list the total number of months that costs will be incurred in the time period above. Subrecipients can round up if the time frame is not an exact month. In Section BA, applicants will input their moving costs to the temporary unit if applicable. Applicants may be eligible for reimbursement of actual and reasonable moving costs and related expenses in connection with their move to a temporary housing unit. Refer to the introduction section of this video for information on eligible temporary and permanent moving costs. Applicants should complete the computation table in Section BA to compute their payment. The computation table includes 2 columns for actual estimated costs backed up with receipts and quotes. quoted costs for 7A commercial move, which should be based on the lower of two quotes received and placed in the file, and 7B estimated costs for self-move. Note the estimated self-move costs cannot exceed the cost it would be for a commercial move. Self-moves should still provide as backup documentation two quotes to prove that the requested amount for the self-move does not exceed the cost for a commercial move. First, cells BA 1 through 9 will be filled in by the applicant with their estimated costs for temporary moving. Other costs can be claimed in 4, and they will need to be explained in the remarks attached to this form as backup documentation. For our example, the applicants received quotes for and plan to use a commercial company to move, so they input their costs in commercial move. In addition, you will see that they are requesting $50 for storage costs for the furniture for their 3-bedroom home for the month that they will be staying in a 1-bedroom apartment temporarily. Then in line 6, the total amount of the request will automatically calculate. If the applicant previously received any money for temporary relocation, they should input that amount into row 7. Then in number 8, row number 7 will automatically subtract from row 6 for their total amount requested. The applicant total amount requested in row 9 will auto-calculate. For our example, the applicant had $550 in moving expenses and had previously received $100, so their total amount requested was $450. If the applicant decides they would rather use a fixed schedule to receive temporary moving costs, then in column 7C, applicants should input their eligible amount for moving based on a fixed moving cost schedule. A fixed payment is used to compute a payment based on the numbers of rooms of furniture within the displacement dwelling. The residential fixed moving cost schedule, available at the FHWA website at the link shown on the screen, will provide the payment amount for the state in which the displacement occurred. First, the applicant will select the number of rooms of furniture within the dwelling they are being displaced from. Remember, bathrooms, hallways, and closets do not count towards rooms of furniture. Or, if the applicant does not own any furniture that needs to be moved, for example, they lost all of their furniture in the disaster, then the applicant can look at the occupant does not own furniture columns to determine their fixed costs. For our example, the dwelling that the homeowner is being displaced from has 3 rooms of furniture. They found the 3 rooms of furniture column, and they scrolled down to see the amount of 3 rooms for the state of Texas. They found that for 3 rooms, they are eligible for $1,000 in Texas on a fixed payment schedule. Note, if a room contains an unusually large amount of personal property, for example, a crowded basement, the subrecipient may increase the payment accordingly, such as counting it as 2 rooms instead of just 1. Or, on the other hand, for households occupying a dormitory-style room who also have minimal possessions, or where the move is performed by the subrecipient at no cost to the displaced person, the payment amount is limited to the amount specified for such moves on the fixed moving cost schedule, which is currently set at a $100 limit. After inputting the fixed amount in 7C number 5, if applicable, the applicant should input any amounts previously received for this purpose, if any. Then the amount requested in number 8 will automatically calculate. In some cases, applicants who plan to claim a fixed payment may also be eligible for additional moving options to move personal property located outside the dwelling and not considered in the fixed moving cost schedule, such as a jungle gym, hot tub, etc., or for personal property requiring specialized moving assistance within the dwelling, such as a piano, pool table, medical equipment, etc. In these situations, the applicant may also be eligible for a payment based on actual costs for a commercial move and/or self-move for these items, in addition to their fixed payment. The applicant will need to attach a justification for the additional costs and quotes or receipts. If the subrecipient determines the applicant is eligible for other moving options in addition to the fixed payment, the applicant should fill in all applicable claim information requested for the types of moving options specified in the following table in 7A or 7B. For our example, the applicant decided to use a combination move where they use the fixed schedule, but they also claimed $200 for a commercial move for their piano since it required specialized and costly moving services. In number 9, the form will total both the fixed move and any specialized costs requested under commercial or self-move. The subrecipient use columns in section BA will be completed by the subrecipient after they have reviewed and completed the form. Section BB. Section BB is for applicants to compute payment for rent and utility costs that surpass what the applicant would have paid at the permanent dwelling from which they are being temporarily displaced. First, applicants should input the month that the costs are being requested for. If applicants are to be temporarily relocated more than 1 month, as can be seen in the total number of months listed above in Section B, they should fill out a separate table for each month. If applicants will only be relocated for part of a month, that month's table should be prorated accordingly. Applicants should input their monthly rent and utility costs in rows 1 through 6. For each row in the table, the applicant should input estimated rent and utility costs that they incurred in the unit they moved from, and the temporary unit they moved to. In row 1, the applicant should enter the monthly rental amount due according to the rental contract and the terms and conditions of occupancy for both the unit from which they are moving and the unit they are moving to temporarily. Then the applicant should mark the checkbox indicating whether or not utilities are included in the monthly rental amount for both the unit they moved from and the temporary unit they moved to. If all utilities are not included in both units, rows 2 through 7 must be completed. In lines 2 through 6, if certain utilities are included in the monthly rental amount, applicants should place IMR for in-monthly rent in the applicable cells for that utility. All utility costs that were paid separately should be noted by the price of their monthly utility cost. Note: applicants should ensure they are inputting all utility services they pay for. You can see in our example how the applicant input their rental and utility costs for both the unit they moved from and the unit they moved to temporarily. At their previous unit, gas was included in the monthly rent, so they input IMR in the cell. And in the unit they are moving to, they had no gas, so they input NA. In line 7, costs from lines 1 through 6 automatically calculate for gross monthly rent and utilities. Then in row 8, applicants should input any housing subsidies received. In line 9, the form will automatically subtract line 8 from line 7 for the total costs for the month. Applicants should complete the tables for each month reimbursement is being requested, and the total for all months will auto-calculate in the net total rent and utility costs row. The subrecipient use columns will be completed by the subrecipient in the subrecipient review phase after reviewing the completed form and documentation. Section BC. In Section BC, the applicant can request other monthly out-of-pocket costs for temporary relocation. In the first row, the applicant should input the month and year for the request. Then in line 10, applicants can request per diem if there are no cooking facilities at their temporary residence. They should include the amount per adult and the number of days in the month, and the amount per child and the number of days in the month. Then input the total for all the adults and all the children in the claimant column. The daily per diem rate can be found by going to the Texas Federal Per Diem Rates for fiscal year 2021 on federalpay.org. Lines 11 through 15 are for other costs such as increased transportation costs, boarding for pets, parking, etc. These items should be listed individually. Requests should have justification and backup documentation attached, such as quotes, invoices, or receipts. In our example, the applicant has a dog named Jingle they cannot bring with them to the temporary residence, so they have to board her. They received 2 quotes from different boarding facilities and went with the lowest quote. They attached justification that dogs are not allowed at their temporary residence and the quotes for pet boarding. They input their $200 per month boarding fee in box number 11. Finally, in the claimants column, the total from lines 10 through 15 will automatically sum. The applicant should complete another cost table for each month requesting other costs, not to exceed 3 months. The net total for all the months will sum in the net total reasonable out-of-pocket costs row. The subrecipient use section for BC will be completed by the subrecipient during their review in the subrecipient review phase. Relocation Assistance Sheet, Section C. Section C of the Relocation Sheet is for applicants to request incentive assistance for their move into the permanent unit. Section C should be completed regardless of whether the applicant moved into a temporary unit or not. If the applicant moved into a temporary unit, in Section C they will input the cost to move from the temporary unit to the permanent unit. If the applicant did not move into a temporary unit first, they will request costs from their unit of displacement to their new permanent unit. The table to compute permanent relocation costs is the same as the table to compute temporary moving costs found in Section BA of the form. Applicants and subrecipients should complete the information for the table to compute permanent moving costs. Refer to Section B of this video for information on how to complete this table. Finally, after the application is completed and all documentation attached, the applicant, and if applicable, co-applicant, will need to sign and date the form certifying that the information presented in this document is true and accurate to the best of their knowledge and belief, and that they understand that providing false representations herein constitutes an act of fraud. False, misleading, or incomplete information may result in ineligibility to participate in this program or any other programs that will accept this document. Additionally, if they receive future funding for the same purpose of the CDBG-DR funds, they will agree to repay the assistance that was duplicated. Warning: any person who knowingly makes a false claim or statement to HUD may be subject to civil or criminal penalties under Title 18 of the U.S. Code 287, Section 1001, and Title 31 of U.S. Code, Section 3729. Relocation Assistance Sheet, Subrecipient Review. The completion of this form should be done in phases. In the first page, the applicant input the requested amounts and attached all backup documentation. In the second phase, the subrecipient will review the request and backup documentation for eligibility, provide technical assistance to the applicant to help them update the form or documentation if needed, and ultimately provide their final assessment of the eligible amounts in the subrecipient use sections. After receiving the completed buyout incentive calculation form from the applicant, the subrecipient should review the form for completion, accuracy, and backup documentation. There should be clear justification and documentation of the applicant's eligibility and need for relocation incentives. After reviewing the form for eligibility and backup documentation, the subrecipient use columns in each section will be completed by the subrecipient. In Section BA, the subrecipient should input the amount that their review of the information provided found eligible in the column corresponding to the type of reimbursement being requested. For example, commercial move, self-move, or fixed schedule. As you can see in the example, The subrecipient found that only $150 are eligible for the commercial move because the lower of the two bids was only $150. Therefore, they input $150 in the subrecipient use column. In Section BB, the subrecipient use columns will be completed by the subrecipient after reviewing the completed form and documentation. The subrecipient should input the amount that their review of the information provided found eligible for the unit that the application moved from and the temporary unit they moved to. Then, in the increase in monthly cost column, the subrecipient should subtract the costs for the unit that the applicant moved from the cost for the temporary unit that they moved to. For example, the applicant is currently paying $1,650 in rent at the temporary unit they moved to. However, previously, they had paid $1,500 in rent. $1,650 minus $1,500 equals a $150 per month increase in cost of rent. Finally, in the approved amount, the subrecipient should input the amount approved for relocation costs based on the increase in monthly costs. Subrecipients should complete the subrecipient use sections for each table that the applicant has completed. The net total rent and utility costs row will have the sum of the final approved amount for Section BB eligible reimbursement for temporary rent and utility costs. In Section BC, the subrecipient use columns will be completed by the subrecipient during their review. In each table, the subrecipient will review the month that the expenses are being requested, the backup documentation, and the subrecipient will input the amount that they found to be eligible based on the backup documentation. The sum of the total amounts eligible for all the months requested will be found in the net total reasonable out-of-pocket expenses row. Finally, when the subrecipient has completed their review of Section B for temporary relocation expenses, they should complete the final table in Section B in the To Be Completed by Subrecipient section. In this section, all of the totals from the tables in Section B have auto-calculated for each temporary relocation cost. In addition, the GLO temporary relocation incentive cap of $5,000 has been included. Subrecipients should input in row 5 the subrecipient cap on temporary relocation incentives, as can be found in their subrecipient program housing guidelines. Then the form will auto-calculate the amount recommended based on the program caps. If the total temporary replication incentive exceeds either the GLO or the subrecipient program cap, the recommended award amount will be limited to that cap. For example, the subrecipient Wrangell County had a $1,500 temporary relocation incentive cap for their buyout program. They input $1,500 in row 5, and the form auto-calculated that the award amount should be $1,500 because the total relocation incentives of $1,525 exceeded the cap. In Section C, in the subrecipient use columns, the subrecipient should input the amount that their review of the information provided found eligible in the column corresponding to the type of reimbursement being requested. For example, commercial move, self-move, or fixed schedule. Once the subrecipient has reviewed the backup documentation and input their amount recommended in the subrecipient use columns in the first table in C, the subrecipient should complete the To Be Completed by Subrecipient table. First, the subrecipient should input their cap according to their housing guidelines for moving costs for relocation incentives in row 2. Then the subrecipient should input the appropriate GLO cap according to the GLO housing guidelines. The GLO cap is $35,000 for a lot or new construction home and $10,000 for an existing home. In our example, the applicant is buying an existing home, so the GLO cap inserted into number 3 is $10,000. As can be seen in our example, if the amount recommended exceeds either of the caps, the amount awarded will be reduced to the caps for the program. The third sheet in the incentives calculation form is the Down Payment Incentive Calculation Form. This form is to be used by applicants applying for down payment assistance incentives in addition to the fair market value of their home. See the introduction section of this video for information on eligibility for down payment incentives. If applicants are eligible and will be applying for down payment incentives, they must complete the Down Payment Incentive Calculation Form. To begin, subrecipients should assist with the completion of the top part of the form. In the first row, subrecipients should input the time frame that applicants must buy a replacement home that is found eligible for down payment incentives. In the next row, they should input the date all requests for down payment incentives must be submitted. These dates can be a hard deadline, such as by December 1st, 2021, or they could be a time frame such as within 3 months of the acceptance of the offer letter. The time frame should be a reasonable amount of time for the applicant to submit the documentation while meeting the program timelines. The timeline should be equitable across all applicants. In the table below, the subrecipient should input the subrecipient name, the GLO contract number according to the GLO contract, the subrecipient case manager working with the applicant, the contact information of the case manager, the applicant name, the applicant ID, which is the Tiger project ID. This number will be generated in Tiger when the applicant's project is created and the left side checklist and application are uploaded. The co-applicant name, if applicable, and the address of the buyout or acquisition property. Note that if the applicant already completed this table for relocation incentives, the information will automatically populate for the Down Payment Incentives tab. In the next row, the applicant should check off all of the incentives that they will be applying for. They should complete a sheet in this calculation form for each incentive checked off. Down Payment Assistance Sheet, Section A. In Section A of this document, applicants should input their relocation information. In the first row, the applicant should check off whether yes, all applicants will or have moved to the same dwelling, or no, household members will move to separate dwellings. If household members will move to different dwellings, applicants should list the names of all household members and the addresses they will move to in Excel row 35. If all of the household members and addresses do not fit in the cell provided, applicants should attach a document titled Remarks, where they will include additional information that didn't fit into the cell. Then the applicant should check yes or no for whether they do or will receive a program subsidy at the dwelling they are moving to. In the table, the applicant should first input the address of the unit they are moving from, and in the following row, the unit they are moving to. Note, if this information has already been input into the Relocation tab, these addresses will auto-populate based on the information input in the Relocation tab. If the unit the applicant is moving from differs from the buyout or acquisition property, justification must be placed in the Remarks section. Then for both units, the applicant should input the date they bought or will buy the unit, when they moved into or will move into the unit, and the date they moved out or will move out of the unit. For our example, you can see that the applicant is not currently living in their buyout property. Therefore, they input in the Remarks section the reason why and explain the NA that was placed in the When Did You Buy This Unit column. The applicant also explained the gap in time from when they moved out of the unit to when they will move into the permanent unit. Down Payment Assistance Sheet, Section B. Section B of the Down Payment Assistance Sheet is for applicants to determine their financial means to provide evidence of eligibility for down payment assistance LMI thresholds. To complete this table, applicants will need to use their completed Adjusted Gross Income and Area Median Income verification tool. In the first row, the applicant should input the total number of household members. Applicants should make sure to include any household members that may move into the household within the next 12 months. Household members listed here should match the household members listed on the AGI and AMI verification tool. If there has been an update to household members or income since the AGI and AMI tool was completed, subrecipients should work with applicants to update the tool. Next, in number 2, subrecipients should assist applicants in completing the 120% median family income limit for their county and household size. Subrecipients and applicants should go to the HUD Income Limits website listed here. From the HUD Income Limits website, select Click Here for FY 2021 IL documentation. Select the state of Texas. Select your county. Click on View County Calculations. In the second column, you will see the median family income for a 4-person household. Note the median income shown is always for a 4-person household. For our example, we see a median income of $55,500 for a 4-person household. 120% of the median income is 1.2 multiplied by the median income. For example, $55,500 times 1.2 is $66,600 at the 120% income limit for a 4-person household. If the household has 4 people, the applicant can input the number they just calculated into the incentives calculation form. However, households that have any other amount than 4 people will need to calculate the 120% income limit for their household size. Here is a table for calculating income limits for households of more or less than 4 people. For each family size, multiply the percentage amount shown by the 120% median income amount for a 4-person household. In the case of families larger than 8 persons, the income limit can be calculated by adding an additional 8% per person to the next lower limit. For example, a 9-person family income limit is 140%, which is 132% taken from the next lowest income limit plus 8%. The resulting low income limit calculations for other family sizes are then rounded up to the nearest $50 to produce the final income limit. You can see in this example chart that if our fictional applicant had only a household size of 2, he would have to perform the additional calculation to determine the 120% income limit for his household size. The 2-person income limit is 80% of the 4-person income limit, so he would multiply $66,000 times 0.8 to get $53,280. The calculations are rounded up to the nearest 50, unless it already ends in a double zero or 50, so it would be rounded up to $53,300 to calculate the 120% income limit for a 2-person household. If on the other hand he had a 6-person household, that income limit is 116% of the 4-person income limit. So he would multiply $66,600 by 1.16 to get $77,256, which he would round to $77,300 to get the 6-person 120% income limit. For our fictional applicant, we have a 4-person household. Therefore, as previously mentioned, the 120% income limit for a 4-person household is $66,600, so the applicant input that in number 2. In number 3, applicants should enter the name of each household member with income and their associated annual income in the claimant column. The household members and income information should match what was reported on the adjusted gross income and area median income verification form. In number 4, the income of the household members listed in number 3 will automatically total. Then in number 5, the annual income is divided by 12 to get the gross monthly income. Down Payment Assistance Sheet Section C. The first part of Section C of the Down Payment Incentive Calculation Form is for the subrecipient to check off whether the applicant is meeting the down payment incentive requirements. The applicant must be able to check off these items to be eligible for down payment assistance. Backup documentation should be attached in the file to demonstrate that the applicant is meeting the requirements, and the checkbox should then be checked off. First, check off if the lot, new construction home, or existing home that the applicant is buying with the down payment assistance is outside the floodplain or in a lower risk area within the subrecipient's jurisdiction. A map with the location of the new home overlaid on the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer map showing the location of the home is outside the floodplain or in a lower risk area should be attached. Next, check off if the home is considered decent, safe, and sanitary. The HQS inspection demonstrating the house is decent, safe, and sanitary should be attached in the file. Next, check off if the funding is being requested within the established time frame written in the subrecipient's housing guidelines. Each subrecipient should have in their program guidelines an established time frame for which the applicant must use the incentive money. Applicants and subrecipients should ensure the funding is being requested and can be used within the time frame established. Next, the applicant should justify the down payment amount requested on the home or lot. Applicant should input the sales price on the home to be bought. Then in number 2, applicant should input the amount that will be financed on the home. In number 3, applicant should input the percentage of the home price that the down payment will be. Then in number 4, the applicant should input the total down payment amount that will be paid on the home. For our example, the applicant is buying a $200,000 home. The bank is requiring that they put down a 15% down payment. Therefore, the family will need to put down a $30,000 down payment. After the down payment and other associated credits and costs, the total amount the applicant will finance is $168,000. The Local Buyout and Acquisition Program considers down payment amounts of up to 20% of the sales price on the home to be reasonable. Requests for down payment assistance higher than 20% of the sales value of the home to be bought must be justified in number 5, with backup documentation attached to support the justification. Finally, the applicant and co-applicant should sign and date the acknowledgement located at the bottom of the page. The acknowledgement states that the applicants and subrecipients certify that the information presented in this document is true and accurate to the best of their knowledge and belief, and that they understand that providing false representations herein constitutes an act of fraud. False, misleading, or incomplete information may result in ineligibility to participate in this program or any other program that will accept this document. Additionally, if they receive future funding for the same purpose of the CDBG-DR funds, they will agree to repay the assistance that was duplicated. Warning: any person who knowingly makes a false claim or statement to HUD may be subject to civil or criminal penalties under Title 18 of the U.S. Code 287, Section 1001, and Title 31 of the U.S. Code, Section 3729. Down Payment Assistance Sheet Subrecipient Review. Once the applicant has submitted the incentive calculation form to the subrecipient should review the form for completion, accuracy, and backup documentation. There should be clear justification and documentation of the applicant's eligibility and need for down payment incentives. After review, the subrecipient should complete the subrecipient use columns. In Section B, subrecipients will review the AMI and AGI calculation form and compare it with the numbers submitted in the down payment incentive form to ensure that applicants have input the correct amounts and that the household income is not more than 120% of the average median income to be eligible for down payment incentives. The subrecipient found in their review that the applicant's numbers were correct, and their gross annual income was less than 120% the limit on median income. Note: while down payment incentives may be provided to households with up to 120% of the area median income, Only those funds used to serve households with up to 80% of the area median income may qualify as meeting the low and moderate income national objective. Subrecipients should also ensure in Section C that applicants are complying with all requirements and backup documentation has been attached. Then, in the To Be Completed by Subrecipient table, the subrecipient should input the amount recommended based on eligibility of the requested amount. The subrecipient should input the cap for down payment assistance incentives as it is listed in their program housing guidelines. The form will then auto-calculate the amount of down payment assistance that can be awarded based on the eligible amounts and the cap. If the amount recommended is over the subrecipient or GLO down payment incentive cap, you will see in the amount awarded row that the awarded amount is reduced to the cap amount. Once the subrecipient has reviewed and confirmed the information, they too should sign and date the application acknowledgement. The final sheet in the incentive calculation form is the buyout incentive calculation form. The buyout incentive calculation form, found on the buyout incentive sheet, is for the use of applicants applying for buyout incentives in addition to the fair market value of their home. See the introduction section of this video for information on eligibility for buyout incentives. If applicants are eligible and will be applying for buyout incentives, they must complete the buyout incentive calculation form. To begin, subrecipients should assist with the completion of the top part of the form. In the first row, subrecipients should input the time frame the applicants must buy a replacement home that is found eligible for buyout incentives. In the next row, they should input the date all requests for buyout incentives must be submitted. These dates can be a hard deadline, such as December 1st, 2021, or could be a time frame such as within 3 months of the acceptance of the offer letter. The time frame should be a reasonable amount of time for the applicant to submit the documentation while meeting the program's timelines. The timeline should be equitable across all applicants. Then, in the table below, the subrecipient should input the subrecipient name, the GLO contract number according to the GLO contract, the subrecipient case manager working with the applicant, the contact information of the case manager, the applicant's name, the applicant ID, which is the Tiger project ID. This number will be generated in Tiger when the applicant's project is created and the left side checklist and application are uploaded, the co-applicant name if applicable, and the address of the buyout or acquisition property. Note, if the subrecipient already completed this table for relocation incentives, the information will automatically populate here. In the next row, the applicant should check off all of the incentives that they will be applying for. They should complete a sheet in this calculation form for each incentive checked off. Buyout Incentive Sheet Section A. In Section A of this document, applicants should input their relocation information. In the first row, the applicant should check off whether yes, all applicants will or have moved into the same dwelling, or no, household members will move to separate dwellings. If household members will move to different dwellings, applicants should list the names of all household members and the addresses they will move to in an attached sheet titled Remarks. Then the applicant should check yes or no on whether they do or will receive a program subsidy at the dwelling they are moving to. In the table, the applicant should first input the address of the unit they are moving from, and then in the following row, the address of the unit that they will be moving to. Note, these addresses will auto-populate based on the information input in the Relocation tab. If the unit that the applicant is moving from differs from the buyout or acquisition property, justification must be placed in the Remarks attachment. Then for both units, the applicant should input the date they bought or will buy the unit, when they moved into or will move into the unit, and the date they moved out or will move out of the unit. For our example, you can see that the applicant is not currently living in their buyout property. Therefore, they input in the Remarks section the reason why, and explain the NA that was placed in the "When did you buy this unit" column. The applicant also explained the gap in time from when they moved out of the unit to when they will move into their permanent unit. Note, if Section A of the down payment sheet has been completed, much of the information in Section A of the Buyout Incentive Information Form will autofill based on the answers input in the down payment sheet. For our example, everything auto-calculated but the information for "When did you buy this unit?" The subrecipient input that information. Buyout Assistance Sheet, Section B. Section B of the Buyout Incentive Calculation Form is completed exactly the same as Section B in the Down Payment Incentive Calculation Form, with the exception of number 2. In number 2, applicants and subrecipients should input the LMI limit for 80% of the average median income. See the Down Payment Assistance Sheet, Section B part of this video for more information on how to complete this section. Buyout Assistance Sheet, Section C. The first part of Section C of the Buyout Incentive Calculation Form is for the subrecipient to check off whether the applicant is meeting the buyout incentive requirements. The applicant must be able to check off these items to be eligible for buyout incentives. Backup documentation should be attached in the file to demonstrate that the applicant is meeting the requirements, and the checkbox should be then checked off. First, check off if the lot, new construction home, or existing home that the applicant is buying with the buyout incentive is outside the floodplain or in a lower risk area within the subrecipient's jurisdiction. A map with the location of the new home, overlaid on the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer Map, showing the location of the home is outside the floodplain or in a lower risk area, should be attached. Next, check off if the funding is being requested within the established time frame written in the subrecipient's housing guidelines. Each subrecipient should have in their program guidelines an established time frame for which the applicant must use the incentive money. Applicants and subrecipients should ensure the funding is being requested and can be used within the time frame established. Then, the applicant should input the information on the buyout home and the replacement home to be bought. First, input the fair market value on the buyout home. Note that this amount should match the offer amount that was given to the applicant in the offer letter. Then the subrecipient should input the sales price on the replacement home or lot that will be bought. Then in number 2, the applicant, with the assistance of the subrecipient, should input the average home price for a comparable home in the market. For our example, the average home price for a 3-bedroom home in Enterprise, Texas is $215,000. So the subrecipient provided this information to the applicant to input in number 2. Number 3 should be the sum of all financing that the applicant will need after down payment and credits on the home. In number 4, input the down payment percentage of the home price. For number 5, the total down payment amount will auto-calculate based on the sales price of the home and the down payment percentage. Next, in number 6, the applicant should input the total amount requesting for down payment and temporary and permanent relocation incentives. For our example, the applicant requested $1,500 in temporary relocation and $1,500 in permanent relocation incentives, and $30,000 in down payment incentives, so they totaled $33,000 in incentives received. In number 7, the applicant should input the total buyout incentive needed in addition to the incentives they are already receiving to buy or construct a new home or lot. Then in number 8, the applicant should justify that need and attach any backup documentation. After completing the form, the applicant, and if applicable, the co-applicant, should sign and date the form acknowledging that the information presented in this document is true and accurate to the best of their knowledge and belief, and that they understand that providing false representations herein constitutes an act of fraud. False, misleading, or incomplete information may result in ineligibility to participate in this program or any other programs that will accept this document. Additionally, if they receive future funding for the same purpose of the CDBG-DR funds, they will agree to repay the assistance that was duplicated. Warning: any person who knowingly makes a false claim or statement to HUD may be subject to civil or criminal penalties under Title 18 of the U.S. Code 287, Section 1001, and Title 31 of the U.S. Code, Section 3729. Buyout Assistance Sheet, Subrecipient Review. After receiving the completed buyout incentive calculation form from the applicant, the subrecipient should review the form for completion, accuracy, and backup documentation. There should be clear justification and documentation of the applicant's eligibility and need for buyout incentives. After reviewing all of the sections, the subrecipient should complete the final table, the To Be Completed by Subrecipient section. Based on the applicant's justification, the subrecipient should input the amount recommended for buyout incentive. Then the subrecipient should input the subrecipient buyout cap according to their program guidelines. The form will automatically calculate, in number 4, the amount to award to the applicant for buyout incentives based off the amount recommended not to exceed the program caps. For our example, the amount recommended was less than the program caps, therefore the amount awarded should be $20,000. The subrecipient will then sign the acknowledgement section as well, acknowledging to the best of their belief that there is no false representation and that they too are subject to the penalties listed in the acknowledgement. We hope you have enjoyed this training on the incentive calculation forms. If there are any additional questions during the completion of the forms, subrecipients should reach out to their General Land Office grant manager. Additional videos covering the other required local buyout and acquisition forms are or will soon be available at the same location you are viewing this one.